All right, today we're talking about PTZ cameras. That is pan, tilt, zoom. Love them or hate them, it's a thing that a lot of churches buy or are told to buy for their church live stream, so it's time to take a look at them. I'm Josh, this is Budget Church Live Streaming, so you already know what it is. Now, first of all, this camera right here and this controller were sent to me by Tenveo to play around with, mess with, kind of get a feel for. So shout out to them for letting me play around with these for the last few weeks. Like I said, PTZ stands for pan, tilt, zoom. And that's because that's what these cameras do. They pan left and right, they tilt up and down, and they zoom in and out. Now, obviously you can do that with any camera if it's in your hand or on a tripod or whatever. But the thing about a PTZ camera is that it's motorized, so it can do all of that remotely with a motor. Now, there's a few different ways that this can actually work, but generally speaking, you set up this camera somewhere and you control it from somewhere else. And you can control it through something like an app, a web browser, or a specific controller that's set up for it. Again, this really just depends on the make and model of the PTZ camera that you have and the other gear that you have to go along with it. So in the case of the Tenveo camera over here, it has a web portal that you can connect to and you can control it there. It's a little bit laggy, it's not amazing, but it works. But they also have this specific controller that you can use. And so this right here has a joystick that you can move around, buttons that you can set presets. You can actually set the zoom speed or change your aperture or your gain or whatever, any of your settings, zoom in and out. Anything that you could do on a camera body, you can do here with this controller. And you get a little screen that shows different settings and whatnot. If you're gonna go all in on PTZ cameras, you're definitely going to wanna get a good controller for it, because controlling things through a web portal or some other third-party app running on a computer, or even an app on an iPad or an iPhone or something, is just not as convenient as actually having this joystick and the full physical control right there in your hands. Now, another one of the benefits of PTZ cameras is that as you're controlling it all remotely through this specific controller and they're all motorized, you can actually set preset positions. So for example, if you have your pastors always preaching from one place, or you want a wide shot, or you want a tight shot of your main guitarist and they're always in the same spot, or you have a baptistry that obviously doesn't move because that would be kind of weird, you can actually program in those presets. So then all you need to do is press a button and it will pull up that preset and the camera will move and zoom directly to where you need it to be. This makes it an awesome option for a team that is pretty small and maybe doesn't have dedicated people to operate each camera, but you still want to be able to move them around to different shots pretty quickly. You don't actually have to adjust each shot as you go, but rather just dial them in beforehand and then just press the button to call it up. So, okay, I've talked about how these work remotely, but how does that actually work? How does that make sense? Are they working wirelessly, or how do they work? Well, generally speaking, no, they're not wireless, but rather they actually go over the network. So this camera and this controller both actually have Ethernet ports on the back of them that they will then plug into your network through that. Once they're on the network, you just have to configure their IP address and whatnot, and then they'll be able to talk to each other. That's one of the benefits of using a dedicated controller that is built for the specific camera you have, is that ideally those actually connect really seamlessly and you don't have to do a lot of setup in case that's something that you're not really skilled in. But as long as it's on the network, you should be able to control it over a pretty standard protocol using any kind of standard controller. But this means that this camera really just needs to be connected over the network, and then you can control it from anywhere in your building as long as you're on the same network. This flexibility is awesome, because if you have a separate broadcast room, or even if you don't, but you have the controller set up somewhere that's not in your main auditorium, it gives you a lot of flexibility in where you actually operate the cameras from, because you don't need to actually have any line of sight to the camera whatsoever. Now, as far as getting the feed out of the camera, there's a few different options. This Tenveo camera here actually has an HDMI port and an SDI port built right into it. So that's quite a bit of flexibility there, depending on where it is set up in your room and where your actual switcher is to ingest the signal. But a lot of these cameras will also work over NDI, and that's a network video interface where the video is actually transferred over the network. Now, this is awesome for PTZs because remember, you're already controlling them over the network. So this actually just means you can run a single cable to these cameras and all of a sudden you're getting control and your video signal all in one. This is super flexible and just so powerful to be able to run all of this off of one cable. This is especially useful because one other big advantage of PTZ cameras is that you can put them kind of anywhere. A lot of times they're placed somewhere where it's hard to get a full-size camera and operator and tripod, but instead you could mount this to the wall or a ceiling or really wherever in a pretty inconspicuous way. So if your church is not really set up for having camera operators and a lot of video space, you can set these up kind of in the corners where you can't really even see them unless you're specifically looking for them. And in these cases, it's super nice to be able to just run a single cable to them. That way you don't have to worry about whether or not you're getting your control and your video output. Running that single Ethernet cable just into your network is so nice in those situations. So, all right, I've had nothing but good things to say about PTZ cameras, so why doesn't everybody use them? Well, there's a couple of very real downsides to them. So number one is going to be your sensor size, right? PTZ cameras are usually pretty small, and they can get bigger than this for sure, but generally speaking, they're pretty compact. If you think about it, you've got a whole lens in here, plus the actual camera brains and sensor itself, all in the size of smaller than what a normal zoom lens would look like. And these usually have a pretty good optical zoom built into them because that's in the name. So because of that compromise though, your sensors are usually pretty small and kind of underpowered compared to something you would get in a full-size cinema camera or even just a DSLR. This can lead to them being not super good in low light, not having amazing dynamic range, and just really struggling to get a crisp, clear-looking image out of the camera. Aside from just the image itself, you're also limited in how much you can move or get interesting shots with these cameras. Even if you just have a camera on a tripod, you can get a little bit of floating motion to kind of give some energy to the shot that it's capturing. With a PTZ camera, that's not really an option. Basically, wherever it's set, it's just gonna be a static shot of whatever it is it's looking at. Now this can be fine and it might be exactly what you're going for in your church broadcast. And if so, I mean, perfect. This might be a great option. But if you're going for something a little bit more cinematic, or you really like watching the Bethels or Elevations of the world and you wanna emulate that, a PTZ camera is probably not the way to go for you. There's also a little bit of a learning curve to them. I mean, you're controlling it with a joystick and you have all these different buttons and whatever, which is not crazy, but if you're working with people who are used to operating physical cameras, it is a little bit different to get used to. Honestly, you might be better off just getting some youths to serve on it because it feels kind of like a video game sometimes. You're controlling everything with a joystick and pressing buttons. And that's not a slight against today's youths. I mean, I think it's pretty easy for me because I grew up playing Call of Duty as well. So if that's you, this might be a great option as far as control is concerned. You'll also notice, I mean, it's all one unit right here. You know, with the cameras we use in our live stream, if we want to be able to get different shots, all we need to do is buy a different lens and we can make the whole thing operate from a completely different place in the room and get even more interesting shots than we were able to get before. With a PTZ camera, you kind of just have one option. Obviously you can move it around the room, but even that's a little bit hard because generally speaking, you're mounting it to a wall. Now, some people just put them up on a light stand or tripod or something anyway, but then I feel like you're losing one of the big benefits of a PTZ camera. So if that's you, I mean, no shade, it's a perfectly viable option, but you got to kind of weigh what makes the most sense. And finally, if you want to overcome some of these cons and get a camera with a replaceable lens, they do exist, or get something with a larger sensor or just better dynamic range or even better control, you're going to be spending a lot of money for it. I mean, the internals of these are not cheap because, I mean, imagine you're combining both the camera and the operator into a single package. You know, that's not going to come for free. So if you're really looking for something that's going to give you the same quality and experience as one of those expensive cameras, it's going to be pretty pricey. But if you've heard those pros and cons and you're like, I don't know, it seems like that's something that would work really well in my church and for the way that we're trying to broadcast our services, then keep listening because I've got some things you want to look out for when you're actually buying a PTZ camera. Kind of like the things we already mentioned, one big thing to really look for is the sensor size. That is really going to hinder you if it's too small, and that's something that a lot of these PTZ cameras have. I mean, think about it, you've seen your cell phone. That's a pretty small sensor. It can take some good pictures, but a lot of that is through some digital after processing, post-processing. Same thing, you know what I mean. And you're just not going to get that out of one of these PTZ cameras. Now, granted, it does have a good zoom on it, generally speaking, so it's probably going to be better than the zoom on your phone's camera. But if you're thinking image quality and you're thinking overall sharpness and dynamic range and such, look at a photo straight out of camera from your phone, and that's about what you can expect from a PTZ camera if it has a small sensor. So that's something to pay attention to. Next, like I just talked about, is the actual zoom range. You know, they're advertising things like 20x, 30x, 50x, whatever. Now, those numbers are kind of hard to actually judge what exactly they mean when you're talking about your space. You know, what is a 30x zoom anyway? It's hard to imagine what that actually looks like. So sometimes you may need to just rent one or borrow one from somebody to try it out and see, does this cover the zoom range that I'm really looking for? Does this get the shots that I'm really hoping to get from it? If it does, then awesome. You know exactly what it is you're looking for as far as an optical zoom. You want to make sure that the camera you're getting doesn't rely on digital zoom at all. That's going to just be cropping in the image. You know, it's like when you take a picture and then you just pinch in to zoom and it gets blurrier and blurrier and blurrier and all pixelated when you get in tight. That's what a digital zoom is. Obviously, with the lens being this long, you'd hope that there's some optical zoom in here, which is actually physically moving some elements to get a real zoom. Most PTZs have this, but just make sure that it's a long enough range that it works for what you're looking for. And then past that, I mean, the big things to look for are just your control options and whether or not it integrates well with your current system. You know, does it have a controller that you can use? Is there an easy way to set it up with the way you're currently streaming? If that's OBS or vMix or an ATEM switcher, I mean, whatever it is, make sure that you can actually control the camera in an easy way so you're not hitting yourself every time you're trying to change shots and it's just really giving you a lot of trouble. Kind of related, make sure that the color matches any existing cameras you already have. You don't want this one random camera that's going to be up in the corner pointing down and just looking totally different. It's not just about the position, it's about the color, it's about the lighting, it's about the dynamic range, everything about it, making sure that it matches into your existing system. Now, speaking of controllers, make sure that the controller you have can actually expand to work with what you need. For example, this controller right here from Tenveo has the ability to control multiple cameras, not all at the exact same time, but you can hit these buttons to kind of switch between them, adjust your shot, and then switch on to the next one. This allows you to adjust one camera while another one's live and not have to have a separate controller for all of the different cameras. Now, obviously you can if you want to have multiple ops operating them all at the same time, but this gives you the flexibility to kind of run it all just from one. Okay, so you've decided a PTZ is for you, you know what to look out for, so what brands are actually out there? Obviously we've got Tenveo for really just the really budget options. These guys come in pretty cheap and honestly they've got an image quality to match. I think it lines up with the price you're paying, but if you're wanting to get a really good quality image, we might be looking into something more like PTZ Optics or Bird Dog, or even Canon and Sony have some really great offerings these days. You're gonna pay a premium for them, but the image quality you're gonna get from it, as well as the level of control, honestly is just that much better. As far as PTZ cameras go, you're gonna get what you pay for. Things in that bottom range really are going to work, but they're just not going to have the same quality that you're gonna get at those higher levels. The image will fall apart at those longer zoom levels and just not have the same quality that you're expecting to see from those more expensive cameras. Honestly, I think PTZs are great for really specific churches and really specific scenarios. I'm always going to advocate for getting a camera that you can actually control with your hands and upgrade and expand later on down the road, and generally speaking, those aren't PTZs. But if your church really just doesn't have space to set up cameras and you really just have some loft areas where you can set these up and you really just need a tight shot of your speaker and maybe a wide shot of the room, PTZs are a great option. So if that's you, awesome, good luck, go find one that works for you and create a great live stream using it. I hope this was helpful, and let me know if you want more PTZ content. It's not something I normally dig into because I don't use them, but hey, if you guys need it, I'm here for it. Until next time.